The morning began like any other in the small city of Ashford Hollow, where the oldest diner in town had served coffee to 3 generations of families. Nobody watching the quiet street that day could have guessed that within 1 hour, a single officer's arrogance would unravel a web of corruption that had been hiding inside the police department for years. A black couple sat at a corner booth, dressed plainly, speaking softly, minding their own business. An officer walked in with his chest puffed out, looking for someone smaller than himself to humiliate. Dozens of customers watched the scene unfold, and almost none of them said a word. What that officer never understood was that the 2 people he chose to target were not ordinary citizens at all. They were undercover detectives, deep inside an investigation that could end his career, his sergeant's career, and expose a truth the whole department had been burying for a long time. Autumn had settled over Ashford Hollow with a soft golden light, the kind that made even tired eyes feel a little more forgiving. Malik Rowan and his wife Imani had just finished an overnight surveillance shift, the kind that drained the body but never touched the mind, because both of them had trained themselves for decades to stay sharp, no matter how long the night stretched. They pulled into the gravel lot of Whitmore's diner in an old gray sedan, with a dent on the back bumper, the kind of car nobody looks at twice. Malik wore a faded denim jacket over a plain gray shirt, and Imani had on a simple cardigan, her hair tied back loosely. Nothing about either of them suggesting anything but 2 ordinary people looking for breakfast after a long night. Inside, the diner smelled like fresh coffee and bacon on the griddle, the hum of quiet conversation filling the room. They chose a booth near the window, the same one they always chose, because from that seat Malik could see the entire room and the street outside without turning his head. Imani slid in across from him and immediately reached for the menu, though she already knew what she wanted, because ordering the same thing every time was one more habit that made them forgettable. A young waitress took their order with a tired smile. 2 coffees, 2 plates of eggs, toast on the side, nothing unusual about any of it. They talked quietly while they waited, the kind of conversation only 2 people who trust each other completely can have. Imani teased him about the way he always drank his coffee too fast and burned his tongue every single time, and Malik laughed, admitting she was right, admitting it every single week for the past 11 years. There was an ease between them that came from more than just marriage. It came from years of watching each other's backs in rooms far more dangerous than a diner booth. Neither of them spoke about work. They never did in public, not even here, not even after a shift that had lasted 18 hours straight. Imani reached across the table and took his hand for a moment, her thumb brushing over his knuckles, a small gesture that said more than words ever could. Malik looked at her the way he always did, like she was still the same woman he had fallen in love with at the academy so many years ago, back when neither of them had any idea how far they would eventually go together. The waitress returned with their plates, and for a few minutes, there was nothing but the comfortable silence of 2 people enjoying a meal after a long, hard night. Imani mentioned, almost offhandedly, that this diner reminded her of a small place back in her hometown, one her grandmother used to take her to every Sunday after church, back when life felt slower and simpler than it did now. Malik listened the way he always did, fully present, never rushing her, letting the memory unfold at its own pace across the quiet table. He told her, in return, about the first apartment they had shared together, a cramped little unit above a laundromat, where the walls shook every time the dryers ran, and how neither of them had cared one bit because they were finally together after years of being stationed in different cities. They laughed softly at the memory, the kind of laughter that only exists between 2 people who have built an entire life out of small, ordinary moments like this one. For a few minutes, they were not detectives, not partners assigned to a dangerous case, just a husband and wife enjoying breakfast on a quiet autumn morning, exactly the way any other couple in that diner might have been doing. Outside, sunlight caught the chrome of a squad car pulling into the lot, tires crunching slowly over the gravel. Neither Malik nor Imani reacted, because squad cars stopping at diners were nothing unusual in a town like this one. What neither of them expected was the way that particular morning was about to change everything, not just for themselves, but for an entire department built on secrets. The door swung open with more force than necessary, and Officer Travis Harlan stepped inside like he owned the building and everyone standing in it. He was 34 years old, built like someone who spent more time in the gym than on actual patrol. His uniform pressed sharp, his sunglasses pushed up on his head, even though the diner was dim. The first thing he did was bark at the young hostess to move a family out of a booth so he could sit closer to the window, and she scrambled to obey without a single word of protest. Travis had a way of walking through a room that made people shrink a little, not because he had done anything to them personally, but because his presence carried the weight of a badge he clearly believed made him untouchable. His eyes swept across the diner slowly, scanning faces the way a predator scans a herd, looking for the one that seemed weakest. When his gaze landed on Malik and Imani sitting quietly in their corner booth, something in his expression shifted, something small and ugly that most people in the room did not even notice. He had grown up in this town, the son of a mechanic and a school secretary, and somewhere along the way, wearing the uniform had convinced him that respect was something owed to him automatically, rather than something earned through decency. Colleagues at the station often described him as ambitious, though few ever used that word with any real warmth behind it. He had been passed over for a promotion twice in the last 3 years, a fact that gnawed at him more than he ever admitted aloud. And lately, he had taken to asserting his authority in small, petty ways whenever the opportunity presented itself. This particular morning, tired and irritable after a rough overnight shift of his own, he was looking for exactly that kind of opportunity, and the quiet couple in the corner booth seemed, to his narrow way of thinking, like an easy target. He noted the faded jacket. He noted the cardigan with a small, loose thread near the collar. He noted the old car parked outside that did not match, in his mind, the kind of car regular customers of this diner usually drove. None of it meant anything, and none of it was his business, but Travis had built an entire career on deciding who belonged where, based on nothing more than a glance. He walked over slowly, thumbs hooked into his belt, his boots heavy against the tile floor, every step deliberate and loud enough to draw attention. "I don't recognize you two," he said, stopping beside their table, his voice pitched just loud enough for nearby booths to hear. Imani looked up first, calm, polite, the same expression she might give a stranger asking for directions. "We're just having breakfast, officer," she said simply. No edge in her voice at all. Malik said nothing yet, choosing instead to study the man in front of him, the way he studied every subject in every interview room he had ever worked. Patient, quiet, absorbing every detail. Travis asked for identification, though he had no legal reason to, and Imani, still calm, asked what exactly they had done wrong. He didn't answer the question directly. Instead, he repeated himself, louder this time, insisting he needed to see identification because, in his words, "People like you don't usually eat here." A few nearby customers glanced up from their plates, uneasy, sensing the shift in the air but unwilling to get involved. Malik finally spoke, his voice low, even, almost gentle. "We haven't broken any laws, and we'd like to finish our breakfast." Travis's jaw tightened at the calm in Malik's voice, as if the absence of fear offended him personally. "I didn't ask for your opinion," Travis said, leaning down slightly, his hand resting on the edge of the table now, close enough that Imani could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "I asked for identification, and I'm not going to ask a third time." Imani tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable, and asked, quite reasonably, whether he had any actual cause to demand it from two people simply eating breakfast. Travis straightened, clearly irritated that neither of them had shown the fear he expected, his eyes narrowing as he glanced toward the small crowd now watching from nearby booths. "Cause is whatever I decide it is," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, a statement that drew a visible wince from an elderly woman seated 2 tables away. "Stand up," Travis said, his tone hardening into something closer to a command than a request. "Both of you, get up and leave." The diner had gone quieter now, forks pausing midair, a few phones lifting slightly from tables as people began to sense that something worth watching was about to happen. Travis's patience, thin from the start, evaporated entirely within seconds, and his voice climbed another notch louder, echoing now off the tiled walls of the diner. He reached out and gripped Malik's shoulder, not gently, pressing down as though trying to force him upward out of the booth by sheer will alone. I said, "Get up," he snapped, "before I make this a lot worse for both of you." Malik did not flinch, did not raise his voice, simply looked down at the hand on his shoulder, and then back up at Travis, with an expression that unsettled the officer more than any shout could have. Around the room, a few customers had begun quietly filming with their phones, the way people do now when they sense injustice happening, but feel too afraid to physically intervene. An older man near the counter chuckled under his breath, muttering something about finally someone doing their job, while a young mother, 2 booths down, looked horrified, pulling her own phone from her purse with trembling hands. Most of the diner, though, simply sat in silence, eyes darting between their plates and the unfolding scene, nobody quite brave enough to stand and speak. A retired construction worker near the front window set down his fork entirely, his jaw tightening as he watched, though even he did not rise from his seat. 2 teenagers sharing a plate of pancakes by the counter exchanged a nervous glance, one of them lifting a phone just high enough to record without drawing attention, careful to keep it low against the table's edge. Behind the counter, a young line cook peered through the small serving window, his spatula frozen mid-motion, watching the confrontation with wide, uncertain eyes. The tension in the room had grown thick enough that even the clinking of silverware seemed to have gone quiet, replaced by the low murmur of Travis's voice growing louder with every passing second. "You two don't look like you can even afford what's on this table," Travis said, his voice dripping with a cruelty that made even his own partner outside visibly uncomfortable through the window. "Maybe that's the real problem here. Maybe you two are here to cause trouble, or maybe you just can't pay. And either way, I'm not interested in finding out the hard way." Imani's expression did not change, though her eyes had sharpened, taking in every word, every gesture, filing it away with the precision of someone who had spent years learning to read exactly this kind of man. Donna Whitmore, the diner's owner for nearly 3 decades, came rushing out from behind the counter, her apron still dusted with flour, her voice pleading for calm. "Officer, please, these are paying customers. There's no need for this," she said, stepping close enough to place herself almost between Travis and the booth. Travis waved her off without even looking at her, telling her to get back behind the counter and let him handle his job, and Donna's face fell, caught between fear of the officer and shame for the couple she had just watched be treated so unfairly. It was at that moment that Sergeant Cole Mercer walked through the door, drawn by the commotion visible through the diner's front window. Cole was 47, broad-shouldered, with the kind of gray at his temples that made people assume wisdom where there was often only stubbornness. Rather than calming the situation, as Donna had hoped, Cole immediately sided with his junior officer, placing a firm hand on Travis's shoulder in solidarity rather than restraint. "What's the trouble here, Travis?" Cole asked, though his tone made clear he had already decided whose side he was on before hearing a single detail. Travis explained, twisting the story slightly, painting Malik and Imani as suspicious, uncooperative, possibly dangerous, though nothing about their behavior had suggested any of that at all. Cole nodded along, glancing at the couple with open suspicion, the kind of look that assumed guilt before a single fact had been established. The tension in the diner thickened, customers now openly staring, phones raised a little higher, the sound of Cole's radio crackling faintly at his hip. Imani remained still, her hands folded calmly on the table, watching both officers with the patience of someone who had faced far worse men in far more dangerous rooms. Malik finally spoke again, his voice steady, almost too calm for the situation, cutting through the noise like a blade through paper. "Is this your final decision?" he asked, looking directly at Cole, not a trace of fear in his voice. The question hung in the air, simple and sharp, and something about the way he asked it made even Cole hesitate for half a second before answering. By now, nearly every customer in the diner had shifted their attention entirely toward the corner booth, sensing that something about this moment did not fit the ordinary shape of a diner disturbance. A retired schoolteacher sitting near the register leaned toward her husband and whispered that something about the couple felt strange, though she could not quite explain what. Donna, still standing nearby with her hands twisted into her apron, noticed it too, the way the couple's eyes moved. tracking every officer, every exit, every face in the room with a precision that had nothing to do with fear. Imani's gaze flicked briefly toward Malik. A small, almost invisible signal passed between them, the kind of silent communication only years of partnership could build. Malik's eyes, meanwhile, moved with quiet efficiency, first to the patrol car parked outside, memorizing its plate number without even seeming to look directly at it. He noted the name stitched onto Travis's uniform, then Cole's, filing both away with the same effortless precision he might use cataloging evidence at a crime scene. He glanced toward the small security camera mounted above the diner's counter, confirming it was active, its red light blinking steadily. None of this behavior matched that of an ordinary, frightened citizen being harassed by police. An ordinary person, faced with two armed officers demanding they leave, might tremble, might raise their voice, might beg or argue or cry. Malik and Imani did none of these things. Instead, they observed, catalogued, and waited, their stillness unnerving in a way neither Travis nor Cole seemed capable of understanding. Imani noted the way Cole's radio crackled with a dispatch call he chose to ignore, filing away the exact time on the wall clock behind the counter for later reference. She counted the exits without moving her head, noting the back door beside the kitchen and the front entrance both officers now stood between. Malik, meanwhile, kept his breathing slow and even, a technique he had taught rookies during training sessions years earlier, the kind of discipline that kept a clear head no matter how loud the room around him became. Neither of them exchanged more than a glance, yet somehow, in that glance, an entire plan passed silently between them, refined by years of working dangerous rooms together without ever needing to speak a single word aloud. Travis, misreading their calm entirely, assumed it was fear disguised as defiance, the kind of frozen silence he had seen plenty of times from people too intimidated to fight back. Emboldened by what he believed was total control of the situation, he pressed harder, stepping closer, his hand drifting toward the radio at his belt, as if preparing to call for backup against two unarmed diners. "You've got until the count of 3, he said, loud enough now that the entire diner had fallen into a tense, uneasy silence, waiting to see what would happen next. It was then that Malik reached slowly into the inner pocket of his denim jacket, his movement deliberate, unhurried, careful enough that even Travis's hand paused halfway toward his holster. Several customers gasped audibly, certain they were about to witness something far worse than a shouting match, phones rising higher, breaths held around the room. What Malik pulled out, however, was nothing more than a plain black cell phone, its screen dark, its surface unremarkable in every way. Nearly everyone in the diner assumed the same thing at once, that he was reaching for a lawyer, perhaps a family member, someone who might rescue him from this humiliation with a phone call full of desperate pleading. They were wrong. Malik pressed a single button on the side of the phone, a sequence so quick, and practiced it barely registered, as unusual to anyone not paying close attention. He raised the device briefly to his ear, and in a voice utterly devoid of panic, spoke 6 words that meant absolutely nothing to anyone in that diner except the person on the other end of the line. Operation Maple. "Status compromised," he said, calm as if reporting the weather, and then lowered the phone without waiting for a reply. Travis blinked, momentarily thrown by the strange, clipped phrase, though he quickly dismissed it as some kind of bluff meant to intimidate him. Imani, without a word, reached into her cardigan pocket and typed a short sequence into her own phone, her fingers moving with practiced speed, sending what appeared to be nothing more than a text message. In reality, it was an authentication code, one that would activate a chain of communication reaching far beyond the walls of this small diner. Neither of them stood. Neither of them attempted to leave. They simply sat back in the booth, hands folded, waiting with the eerie patience of people who already knew exactly what was coming next. Travis, furious at what he perceived as continued defiance, unclipped a pair of handcuffs from his belt, the metallic click drawing gasps from several onlookers. "That's it," he snapped, stepping around the table toward Malik. "You're both under arrest for obstruction." Cole, still standing nearby, nodded in approval, apparently ready to back whatever charge his junior officer decided to invent on the spot. Donna covered her mouth with both hands, tears welling in her eyes, certain she was about to watch 2 innocent people dragged out in cuffs over nothing but a bad breakfast and worse judgment. A tense silence stretched across the diner as Travis circled the table, the handcuffs dangling loosely from his fingers, his confidence swelling with every step closer. Somewhere near the counter, someone whispered a plea for him to stop, though the voice was too quiet and too frightened to carry any real weight. Imani sat perfectly still, her eyes locked not on Travis but on the window behind him, watching the parking lot with the patient focus of someone counting down seconds on an invisible clock. Malik did not move either, his hands resting calmly on the table, his expression betraying nothing but quiet, unshaken patience, as though he already knew exactly how many more seconds this moment had left to run. At that exact moment, through the diner's front window, several unmarked black sedans rolled quietly into the parking lot, moving with a coordination that no ordinary traffic could explain. Customers near the window turned first, drawn by the sudden convergence of vehicles arriving almost simultaneously, doors opening in near-perfect unison. Travis, cuffs still dangling from one hand, paused mid-step, his confidence flickering for the first time since he had entered the building. Nobody in that diner, including Cole, had any idea what was unfolding outside, though the growing knot in Travis's stomach suggested some instinct within him already sensed his mistake. The diner's front door swung open once more, and this time it was not another customer or a curious neighbor walking in. A woman stepped through first, moving with the calm, deliberate authority of someone who commanded rooms for a living, her badge already visible on her hip, her eyes scanning the space with practiced precision. Behind her, 5 more figures entered in plain clothes, their postures unmistakably trained, their presence instantly transforming the atmosphere of the diner from confusion into something closer to reverence. Captain Naomi Ellis walked directly past both Travis and Cole without acknowledging either of them, her focus entirely fixed on the booth in the corner. She stopped in front of Malik, straightened her shoulders, and said a single word that stunned nearly everyone listening. "Sir," she said, her voice crisp, respectful, unmistakably deferential toward the very man Travis had just tried to drag out in handcuffs. The diner fell into a silence so complete that the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter suddenly seemed deafening. Imani reached into her cardigan once more, this time producing a small leather badge wallet, flipping it open with a practiced motion that revealed a gleaming detective's shield beneath the fabric. Malik followed, retrieving a folded document from his jacket, an official assignment certificate bearing seals that Travis recognized instantly, seals belonging to the very department he served under. Naomi turned to address the stunned diner, her voice carrying easily across the silent room, without needing to be raised at all. "These 2 individuals," she said, gesturing toward the booth, "are Detective Malik Rowan and Detective Imani Rowan, both currently assigned to an internal affairs and organized crime task force." A ripple of shock passed through the crowd, whispers breaking out despite the tension still thick in the air. Naomi continued, explaining that the couple had spent the past several months embedded in an undercover operation targeting corruption within this very city's police department, an operation that had, until this exact morning, remained completely confidential. Travis's face drained of all color, the handcuff slipping from his fingers and clattering uselessly against the tile floor. Cole, standing frozen beside his junior officer, opened his mouth as if to explain himself, though no words managed to escape. Naomi's gaze shifted toward him, cold and unblinking, the kind of look that needed no accompanying threat to communicate exactly how much trouble he now faced. Donna, still standing near the counter with tears streaking her cheeks, pressed a trembling hand to her chest, overwhelmed by the sudden and impossible turn the morning had taken. Whispers rippled through the diner as customers turned to one another in disbelief, several lowering their phones now that the scene had shifted from shocking cruelty to something closer to stunned wonder. The 2 teenagers by the counter exchanged a wide-eyed look, one of them mouthing the word detective silently to the other, as if still trying to convince himself it was real. The retired construction worker near the window let out a low whistle under his breath, shaking his head slowly, muttering that he had never seen anything quite like it in all his years living in this town. Even the young line cook, still peering through the serving window, had gone completely still, his spatula forgotten entirely in his hand. Naomi allowed the silence to stretch for a long moment before speaking again, letting the weight of the revelation settle fully over the room. She explained, calmly and without theatrics, that everything which had just occurred inside this diner had already been recorded, not only by the customers' own phones, but by multiple additional sources that neither Travis nor Cole had been aware of. The diner's internal security camera, she noted, had captured the entire confrontation from start to finish, its footage already secured. Beyond that, she revealed, several of the plainclothes officers who had just entered had been stationed nearby for the past hour, their own body cameras running continuously since before Travis had ever stepped through the door. Travis's mouth opened and closed several times, no coherent sound emerging, his earlier confidence completely dissolved into stunned disbelief. Malik finally rose from the booth, unhurried, brushing a small crumb from his sleeve, before speaking directly to the sergeant, standing frozen beside his subordinate. "This wasn't the first time," Malik said quietly, his tone free of anger, free of triumph, simply stating a fact. He revealed that Officer Harlan's name had appeared repeatedly throughout the ongoing investigation, tied to at least 7 prior incidents involving excessive force, unlawful searches, and repeated interference with cases that should never have been obstructed. Cole's face went pale as Malik continued, explaining that 2 of those obstructed cases had, in fact, been directly connected to the very corruption network Malik and Imani had spent months infiltrating. What today's incident revealed, Malik explained, was not an isolated lapse in judgment, but rather the final, unnecessary mistake in a long pattern of behavior that had already been under close scrutiny. Naomi added that the investigation into Travis's conduct would now expand immediately, incorporating today's events as fresh, undeniable evidence gathered in full view of dozens of witnesses. Cole's hands trembled slightly at his sides, the reality of his own complicity settling over him with crushing weight. One of the plainclothes detectives who had entered alongside Naomi stepped forward, holding a slim folder that had clearly been prepared well in advance of this very moment. Inside, Naomi explained, were sworn statements from 3 separate citizens who had filed complaints against Travis over the past 2 years. Each one previously closed without any real investigation, each one now reopened, as of this morning. She noted, calmly but firmly, that Sergeant Mercer's signature appeared on every single one of those closed files, a detail that made Cole's already pale face turn nearly gray. Travis opened his mouth to protest, to claim some kind of misunderstanding, but the words died in his throat the moment he saw the folder being handed directly to Naomi's assistant for processing. Within hours, the quiet corruption investigation that had remained hidden for months exploded into something far larger than anyone inside that diner could have anticipated. Naomi's team, working alongside city officials, obtained warrants to search the records room at the Central Police Station, along with several computers belonging to officers named throughout the ongoing case files. What they uncovered painted a picture far darker than even Malik and Imani had initially suspected during their long weeks of quiet observation. Investigators found altered incident reports, dates, and details quietly changed to protect officers accused of misconduct, some stretching back nearly 4 years. Digital forensics teams recovered deleted evidence files, including body camera footage that had been wiped from department servers, following at least a dozen separate complaints filed by citizens over the years. Several bank accounts, traced carefully by financial investigators working alongside Malik's team, revealed unexplained deposits totaling well over $200,000 across multiple officers, funds that seemed to originate from a private security contractor with no legitimate connection to the department. The pattern that emerged was unmistakable. A small but powerful group within the department protecting one another while quietly profiting from the very corruption they were sworn to prevent. Investigators also discovered a small notebook hidden inside Cole's desk drawer, filled with handwritten notes detailing which officers had been warned in advance about surprise inspections and which citizen complaints had been quietly buried before ever reaching a supervisor's official desk. One entry, dated nearly 8 months earlier, referenced a payment of $15,000 connected to a case involving a warehouse raid that had mysteriously turned up empty despite reliable informant tips beforehand. Malik recognized the case immediately, having reviewed it himself during the earliest weeks of the undercover operation, never once suspecting it would eventually trace back so directly to the sergeant, standing before him now. Piece by piece, the investigation revealed a system that had rotted quietly from the inside for years, hidden behind a badge that the community had once trusted without question. News of the search spread quickly through Ashford Hollow, and by midday, Mayor Elliot Crane had arrived personally at the police station, his expression a mixture of shock and barely contained fury. Elliot, 52 years old, and known throughout the city for his careful, measured public persona, stood before a small crowd of reporters that had gathered outside the station within hours. He announced, his voice tight with controlled anger, that an independent oversight committee would be formed immediately, separate entirely from the department's own internal structure, to review every finding uncovered during the investigation. Word of the diner incident, combined with news of the search, spread through the city with startling speed, moving from neighbor to neighbor, from shop to shop, until nearly everyone in Ashford Hollow had heard some version of the story by nightfall. The days that followed brought a wave of public attention few in Ashford Hollow had ever witnessed before. The quiet incident inside Whitmore's diner, having grown into something the entire city could not stop discussing. Footage from the morning, captured by several customers who had been present, circulated widely among residents, passed from phone to phone with a speed that stunned even Naomi's experienced team. A formal press conference was held outside the City Hall steps. Mayor Elliot Crane, standing beside Captain Naomi Ellis, as both addressed a crowd far larger than anyone had expected for a city as small as this one. Elliot spoke first, his voice steady, despite the visible tension in his shoulders, acknowledging publicly that the department had failed the community in ways that demanded immediate and lasting reform. He praised the courage and professionalism of detectives Malik and Imani Rowan, careful to note that their composure under such humiliating treatment had ultimately protected the integrity of an investigation that would now hold multiple officers accountable. Naomi followed, outlining the scope of the corruption uncovered, promising transparency throughout the disciplinary process, and confirming that additional officers beyond Travis and Cole were now under active review. In the days after the press conference, Donna Whitmore found herself approached repeatedly by customers offering quiet apologies, some for their own silence that morning, others simply overwhelmed by shame at having witnessed injustice without acting. She accepted each apology gently, though she made clear, more than once, that the true courage that day had belonged entirely to the couple who had sat calmly through humiliation without ever losing their composure. Several former victims of Officer Harlan's past misconduct, encouraged by the sudden public attention, came forward for the first time, filing formal complaints that added even more weight to the growing case against him. Their stories, long buried out of fear or hopelessness, finally found an audience willing to listen. One young man, a delivery driver named Marcus Doyle, described being pulled over twice in the same month for what he was told were routine checks, though both times he had been released without so much as a warning once Travis realized there was nothing to find. A woman named Rachel Simmons, who ran a small flower shop downtown, recalled an afternoon nearly 2 years earlier when Travis had accused her teenage nephew of shoplifting without any evidence at all, an accusation that had never gone anywhere, but had left the boy shaken for months afterward. Each new account added another thread to a pattern that oversight investigators now had no choice but to take seriously. The weight of dozens of small, previously ignored injustices finally converging into something impossible to dismiss. Officer Travis Harlan was formally suspended without pay within 72 hours of the incident, his badge and service weapons surrendered under the watchful eyes of 2 senior officials from the newly formed Oversight Committee. Sergeant Cole Mercer, though not immediately suspended, was placed under formal investigation, his years of quiet protection for junior officers finally catching up with him in ways he had clearly never anticipated. Throughout it all, Malik and Imani remained remarkably private, declining nearly every request for interviews, choosing instead to let the evidence and the process speak entirely for itself. Their quiet dignity, so different from the loud outrage swirling around the city, only seemed to deepen the public's growing respect for them. A local business owner organized a small gathering outside City Hall, not a protest exactly, but a quiet vigil of sorts, residents holding handwritten signs thanking the two detectives for their courage without ever naming them directly, respecting the privacy they had so clearly asked for. A retired police captain, long since removed from active duty, wrote a letter to the local newspaper, praising the couple's restraint, noting that true strength rarely needed to raise its voice to be heard. Even Elliot Crane, usually careful never to single out individual officers in public statements, made a brief but pointed remark during a follow-up press briefing, calling Malik and Imani the kind of quiet professionalism this department desperately needs more of. The city, once divided by fear and silence, seemed slowly to be finding its way towards something resembling unity, built not on outrage alone, but on genuine accountability. A full week passed before Ashford Hollow began to feel something close to normal again, the initial shockwaves of the scandal settling into a steadier rhythm of accountability and reform. On a cool, quiet morning much like the one that had started it all, Malik and Imani returned to Whitmore's diner, choosing once again the same corner booth beside the window. Donna spotted them the moment they walked through the door, and rather than a nervous glance or a cautious greeting, she crossed the room quickly, wrapping Imani in a warm, grateful embrace before either of them could even sit down. The atmosphere inside the diner felt entirely different this time, free of the wary glances and uneasy silence that had filled the room just 1 week earlier. Regular customers nodded respectfully as the couple settled into their booth, a few offering quiet words of thanks, though none lingered long enough to make the moment uncomfortable. Malik ordered his usual, coffee and eggs, toast on the side, and Imani smiled at the familiarity of it all, grateful that some things, at least, had remained exactly the same. As they waited for their food, Malik looked out the window at the quiet street beyond, watching the town move slowly through its morning routine, unaware of how close it had come to losing faith entirely in the people meant to protect it. "The most dangerous thing," he said quietly, more to himself than to Imani, though she was listening closely as always, "isn't power itself. It's power that believes no one will ever be brave enough to question it." Imani reached across the table, resting her hand gently over his, her expression soft but certain. "And justice," she said, "always begins the moment someone finally decides to stand up." Malik nodded slowly, turning his attention back to his coffee, allowing himself, for the first time in months, a genuine and unguarded smile. Around them, the diner buzzed with ordinary conversation, the comforting clatter of plates and cups, the simple rhythm of a town slowly healing itself one quiet morning at a time. Donna stopped by their booth once more before the morning rush picked up, setting down a small plate of pastries neither of them had ordered, insisting quietly that it was on the house for as long as they kept coming back. Imani thanked her warmly, and for a moment the two women simply looked at each other, an understanding passing between them that needed no further words. Malik glanced toward the front window, watching a school bus roll slowly past, children's laughter faintly audible even through the glass, a small reminder of the ordinary life this city was slowly reclaiming for itself. He thought, briefly, of all the mornings just like this one that might have gone differently for other people in other towns, people who never got the chance to be believed, and the thought settled heavily in his chest before passing just as quickly. Imani noticed the shift in his expression, the way it always seemed to happen when his mind wandered toward the weight of the job rather than the comfort of the moment. She squeezed his hand gently under the table, drawing his attention back to her, back to the warmth of the diner, back to the simple fact that today, at least, something had gone right. "We did our job," she said softly, "and for once, doing our job actually meant someone got to keep theirs, and someone else finally lost one they never deserved." Malik managed a quiet laugh at that, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly, grateful as always for her ability to find clarity in moments that could easily become heavy. Outside, the golden autumn light spilled gently across Ashford Hollow's streets, warming a city that had learned, in the most unexpected way, that true justice rarely announces itself loudly. It arrives quietly, patiently, carried by people willing to sit still and wait for the truth to finally reveal itself. The camera of memory pulls back slowly from the corner booth, past the window, past the gravel lot, where an old gray sedan sits parked beside a scattering of ordinary cars, out onto the street where the town continues its quiet morning rhythm, unaware of how close it had come to losing something far more valuable than a single breakfast. Ashford Hollow moves forward now, a little wiser, a little more watchful, carrying with it the simple lesson that dignity, patience, and truth will always outlast arrogance in the end.